And we are rolling on January 26th. We are looking at the debate question at UCLA. Be it resolved that the U.S. federal government would continue to allow in Syrian refugees. The U.S. federal government would continue to allow in Syrian refugees.
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, the homeless, the tempest tossed to me, I lift my lamp beside the golden door. These are the words inscribed on the pedestal of our Statue of Liberty, and they represent the notions and ideals of what we claim to represent as Americans and what we are as Americans. Now let's do a quick history lesson. After the end of the Vietnam War, hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese were fleeing their country after their war-ravaged living situation rendered them unable to live there. The United States took in 125,000 Vietnamese refugees amidst claims internally in this country that they would be ideologically unfit, that they would be communist agitators, that they're only seeking to infiltrate and cause harm. We also took over 1 million Cubans as a result of the Cold War. Amidst those same internal agitations and arguments, over 300,000 Soviet Jews after 1988, amidst those same ideological arguments that these people would not be compatible with our value system. The commonality is that those same arguments used back then are the same ones being used today with Syrian refugees, that they're simply not compatible, that they're going to cause harm, that terrorists are going to infiltrate, and I will assure you today that none of these things are true, and it's in the U.S.'s moral interest and principled interest and economic interest to take in 100,000 Syrian refugees over the next 5 years. So let's get to some definitions first. What is a refugee? A refugee is someone who comes to the United States to be permanently resettled. This is distinct from a visa, right? So whereas a visa is more of temporary residency. The weighing mechanism for this debate today is going to be both a net benefits and principled argument, right? So I'm going to make a principled argument up front, but then also tell you why in the net benefits frame of mind it's going to be more beneficial. So the first argument is the Pottery Barn rule, right? If you go to the Pottery Barn, you'll see a sign. It says you break it, you own it. What it means is that if you screw something up, you have to take responsibility for it. And so while we don't have to agree on which president destabilized the region more. Was it Obama for not taking out Assad and prematurely taking troops out of Iraq? Or was it Bush for going into Iraq first and destabilizing the region? We don't have to agree on which one is more at fault, but we can agree that we contributed to the destabilization of the region, and this has led to several refugees, millions of them, needing a place to live. I'll take off.
Yes, now if you really want to use this Pottery Barn rule, then what we should be trying to do is to fix the problem, to actually buy that problem, not just take in the refugees, but to try to actually instill stability in the region. Taking in all the refugees is going to do the opposite. It's going to continue to destabilize it.
So that's just simply not true. And the Pottery Barn rule isn't that you repair the thing that you broke, it's that you buy it, and then if you want to, you repair it, right? And so we're going to do that. Sorry, not at this time. This is a humanitarian emergency of the highest order that we have contributed to, that the United States is not doing enough to combat. The U.S. has lots of experience with refugees. We normally settle more in the United States than any other country, so we have experience with it. We have great nonprofit organizations, amazing churches, mosques, and synagogues who will be able to provide for these people. Why does this argument matter? This fulfills our nation's obligations, not just to ourselves, but to the rest of the world, that we are still the leader of the free world. It upholds our values of freedom and liberty, which are so important. And I've got a lot to get through, so maybe I'll take y'all at the end. And I'm sure my next arguments will address whatever your PLIs are. So this is now the second argument. After the Pottery Barn rule, which was my first, this is the second one. Let's talk about the vetting process, okay? The vetting process. First, if you are a Syrian refugee, you apply through the UN High Commission for Refugees, where they collect documents, conduct interviews, and less than 1% of those who apply are then recommended for resettlement in the U.S. Now, this is where this process then starts, if you're one of them, where you're referred to the State Department for a comprehensive vetting process where more information is collected. Then you go through the National Counterterrorism Center, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security. If you are Syrian, then you go through the Syria Enhanced Review process, which is run through the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, for fraud detection, to the National Security Directorate. And at this point, the process has barely even started. So then you interview with the USCIS officers, you get fingerprinted, and your biometrics are run through the FBI and CIA and DHS and DOD databases, Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security. Then health screenings begin, which if you haven't already had a stroke going through this entire process, you're probably going to pass through the health screenings. And then cultural orientation classes after that. And then this information continues to be checked against databases. All of this happens before one refugee boards a plane to come to this country. Sorry, I'm running pretty quick. I've still got more to talk about. I'll take y'all later. Similarly, no terrorist in their right mind would choose to go through this process when they could go through the visa process, which is a lot easier, as we saw with the San Bernardino shooting. So let's remember that this is the refugee process. Why does this matter? It means that we have massive risk mitigation because of this vetting process, and that we can be highly selective. Yeah, Brune.
Yeah, so you mentioned that no terrorists will go through this process, right? But if you simplify the process, are you not increasing the likelihood that that could happen?
I'm not simplifying the process. It's the same process that exists. I'm just saying we can take in more people. Now, let's get to a risk acceptance analysis. This is my third argument, risk acceptance analysis. Okay, we all accept tiny amounts of risks in our everyday lives. From driving cars, even though cars kill 30,000 Americans every year. We go swimming, yet 10 Americans per day drown while they are swimming. 20 Americans are killed by cows a year, and not even Donald Trump is suggesting that we expel all cows from our country. So any rational person knows that you cannot completely eliminate risk, you only seek to manage it. So that's the risk acceptance analysis, that we face very low risk. Sorry, Austin, I'll have to take you later. I'm gonna go over the 7 minutes. But my next argument, which is on a net benefit scale, right? Why we want to do this for our own economy. Immigrants are inherently entrepreneurial, right? There's something inherently and intuitively entrepreneurial about leaving everything you know behind and going somewhere else and starting a new life for yourself. Have any of you used the telephone or gone on Google? Guess what? Alexander Graham Bell and Sergey Brin, the founder of Google, are immigrants to this country. They innovated, right? They brought the startup mentality here to this country. Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, two presidential hopefuls, are children of immigrants. Now, you may disagree with their politics, but they are absolutely innovative in the sense that they were able to rise through the political ladder in this country. Even if they are not entrepreneurs, they will participate in the labor force. The United States has always benefited from an immigrant labor force. Why is this important? We get more innovation, we get more labor participation, more of an entrepreneurial spirit. Let me add to that over 40% of the Fortune 500 companies were started either by immigrants or children of immigrants. These are the people who are creating the change and the innovation that we want to see in our country. Yeah, I'll take Aaron.
All the examples of risk you gave us were risks where the individual is aware of them and elects to take part in them. Do you have a relevant example for what applies in this case?
Absolutely. Maybe you missed my whole introduction about Vietnam in 1975 with 125,000 Vietnamese, 300,000 Soviet Jews, over 1 million Cubans, where all of these same arguments about, oh, they're agitators, they're terrorists, they're not going to fit in, all of those were made. None of them came to be true. And so at the end of the day, for the tremendous good that it will do for our nation and for the Syrians, and for the small amount of risk that it is worth, we think that just as though we are not kicking cows out of this country and we still continue to drive cars, that we should allow Syrians into this country too.
Thank you. Okay. Let's hear from some comments on the case, point by point, if we might. How was your flow? Were you able to get it down a single column and get all the points? Let's start at the top. He started with the quote from the Statue of Liberty, "Send me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." How did that work for everyone? Okay?
That was probably a good introduction.
Good setting of the tone of this is an American tradition. Anyone think it was corny or not so good? You didn't like it? Okay. Okay, all right. So you gave us a quick history, right? And you told us about Vietnam and Cuban and the Jews, the Soviet Jews in 1998. And so you claim that we have taken in a lot of refugees before and no problem. So we should do it again, right? That's a fair statement of your argument. And so what do you say to that, ladies and gentlemen? Worked before? Are these examples analogous?
I mean, I just think the classic analogy is that.
By the way,
early
since we have new people,
bird
this is Austin, our team captain for the new people. This is Austin.
Yeah, I thought the intro was solid. And like your second point, I want to steal that. That was like so well done. Your like description of the vetting process.
Yeah.
My concern was the risk acceptance analysis,
Okay.
which I thought was kind of unfair, especially because like way more than 20 people have already been like assaulted in all these other countries. And, like 20 people get killed by cows, but like how are cows and refugees at all comparable or swimming? The driving one, maybe, I guess you could say that, but like, yeah, I thought that was kind of uncomfortable because you didn't even give like the risk that would take up Syrian refugees. You just asked us to assume the risk is going to be lower. So I didn't like that, and then the entrepreneurial.
Okay, could you? I don't want to run. I don't want you to go through everything. I want to go through it a little more on point by point. If you could hold your thought for a moment. So I'm going to rule that comment out of order for just a moment. What about his claim that we did it before and it worked okay? Any problem with the analogy? Are these analogous situations? The Vietnamese, the Cubans, and the Soviet Jews were the same concerns and claims that they made similar to the one concerns and fears that people have now, yes or no?
I think that...
Say your name for the new
my name's
people.
Jared. I think that
Hi,
one
Jared.
potential issue you could run into is like if someone were to say, well, let's look at the history behind why those people are accepted, and the threats are very different because back in the day, which is not really that far back, but anyways, we're not looking at like insurgency and terrorism threats as much as now most scholars I think would agree that the number one threat to developed countries is going to be insurgencies and terrorism, wherein you can't just, it's not easy to differentiate between combatants and non-combatants. So when you make that analogy, and sure at the time there was probably some arguments, it's like, oh my god, they're going to kill us all, but you have to look at like, okay, well, how were they, were those groups of people, were those countries or nationalities actually inflicting violence? And generally it was through like on the battlefield, and there's much more clarity in the line between combatant and non-combatant.
Okay, that's a fair point. Good comment, Jared, on this point, right?
Okay, so my name is Harsh.
Hi,
In just
Harsh.
terms of comparison between those two wars, I think the time when we accepted those refugees, the U.S., I'd say foreign policy was focused on influencing its sphere of dominance because it was Cold War era. But right now, I would say its main motivation is protecting homeland or protecting its own citizens. So in that comparative analysis, the risk is so much greater now.
Okay, fair point. Good point. Yeah. I'm going to ask Madeline what she would do to refute this in just a moment. Yes, sir.
You could say one
Start
name.
with your name.
My name is Liam.
Hi,
I'm a
Liam.
poli-sci major. You could say that a main difference between Syrian refugees and all the others is that none of the other groups you mentioned really were motivated by a violent fundamentalist interpretation of a religion whose doctrines have plenty of material that encourages such violent behavior.
Fair point. Okay. Madeline, what would your reputation be to this point?
To that point.
No, to these first points that he made that, hey, it worked in the past, it'll be okay to do it again?
I mean, what everyone else said.
What's wrong with that reasoning?
How like, the circumstances are different now. We have a different administration. We focus on different things. And how you can't necessarily use the past to say that it will be okay now because we're in a different world. We're post 9/11. And there are different things at stake right now.
Yeah. In particular, I don't remember a lot of flack about the Soviet Jews. I do remember the flack about the Vietnamese and the Cubans, but I don't remember a lot of flack. I could be mistaken. I don't remember a lot of protests about us taking in Soviet Jews. I could be wrong. Okay, his definition of refugees was pretty uncontroversial. Let's talk about his criterion. He talked about net benefits, but he also was trying to work in a kind of a moral concern too. How's this going to work in the debate? Is that the best way to evaluate this? That there are more benefits to taking in the refugees than harms? Or should we be doing risk analysis? Is that a better standard? Yes, please.
I think that was a very clever
Name?
Oh, my name's Jared again.
Hi, Jared.
So when we look at like how we're going to impose a weighing mechanism, it's important to consider like who are we trying to convince. And I think especially with this argument in particular, people who are against Syrian refugees coming are not really going to buy the moral argument because they've already made that decision where like, okay, that's not good. So the way to convince them is to say, hey, but look at all these good things that are going to happen if we let them in. So even if you hate people based on like the fact that they're those types of people, and look at all the good things that you're going to get out of accepting them. And so that would actually be more persuasive to people who were already against the value. But then tying in the value like kind of as a backdoor weighing mechanism is also clever because at the end of the day, people are still going to have to engage the morality, and because it's been weaved into the weighing mechanism already, although not explicitly stated, you will be somewhat guarded on that.
Okay, I think that's a good point, a subtle point. I think also you were clever in saying gosh, it's safe, and gosh, it's beneficial. Those were your two advantages, right? So what's the problem? Yeah, okay. So I'd like to, make sure that we're going to use that in the debate and say that. But if you came into clash with the other side that said the highest and most important value in foreign policy is for a nation to protect its citizens, and the team that best protects its citizens and keeps them safe is the one that should win the debate. How do you resolve when you've got two criterions floating around in the room?
I would defer. I would say that the affirmative team obviously has the burden of setting the weighing criterion. So as long as it allows for an equal debate, then I'd go with whatever the affirmative sets it as.
Do you think you could still operate your arguments within the safety?
Yeah, I think so. I would say that there's very little safety risk, and that the economic benefits are going to allow us to spend more on our military, more on our national security, and in that sense, it's actually going to keep us safer.
Okay.
I hopefully would not want to argue that weighing mechanism, but I think I could.
I saw a new hand here.
No, I was just making
Any other comments on the criterion? Yes.
I have a question with something which is, I'm in Sia.
Hi.